If you eat carbohydrates and experience a lot of digestive symptoms, you could be dealing with what's called carbohydrate intolerance. And the typical foods that will create these types of symptoms for these individuals will be things like milk or dairy, fruit, some grains, sweets, starches, and the typical symptoms are things like gas and bloating and pain or diarrhea and even constipation. And as we go over the things in this video that can cause this problem, and we're going to cover two different problem areas that can create this, you're going to see that it could create a wide variety of digestive symptoms. Just know that we're not talking about gluten intolerance, that's a different situation, and we're also not talking about insulin resistance. Some people will kind of group these things together, and insulin resistance is really more of a metabolic intolerance to metabolizing those carbohydrates correctly. But we're really talking about gut or digestive intolerance and the symptoms that can come up when an individual eats these different types of carbohydrates. So there are some genetic factors that can restrict specific enzyme production in the body. That is possible. It's just a little bit more rare, but a lot of doctors will just kind of dismiss this issue as, oh, this is a genetic thing a lot of times. And well, since I told you it was genetic, it's not my fault. Don't yell at me, go yell at your parents. And why don't I just give you these enzymes? But when we go over these studies here that we're going to go over, you're going to see that this is an issue that can be corrected in most cases. So this study here on carbohydrate maldigestion and intolerance will be the study that we'll pull a lot of this information from, and I'm going to put links to these studies in the description below so you can dig deeper into these if you want to learn a little bit more. But what's going on in most cases is that these are undigested carbohydrates that then come down, and when they get into the colon where all this good bacteria is, now this bacteria starts to ferment those undigested and unbroken down carbohydrates and sugars, and that fermentation process creates a lot of gases, and those gases can expand that colon and make a lot of pain or discomfort going on. So a lot of times the body will also try to rush things out of there, and it can create a diarrhea issue. So that's the most common issue, is just the fermentation of undigested carbohydrates. But if a person has a SIBO issue, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, like all the cool kids have now, then that fermentation can happen here in the small intestine, even before those carbohydrates will get fully broken down. It's also possible to happen in the stomach if there's an H. pylori issue. H. pylori doesn't ferment carbohydrates, but they can set up the stomach for other types of bacteria to come in and colonize and ferment carbohydrates there. So the problem can take place in a wide variety of areas in the digestive tract, which is why it can be tricky for some people to really nail down what's going wrong. So in a lot of cases, these carbohydrates are not being broken down properly because the body is not giving them the amylase, which is a digestive enzyme that we use to break down carbohydrates. Now, amylase is a little bit in our saliva there, but the main amylase comes from the pancreas to help us break down those carbohydrates. And a lot of people are told, well, oh, you have pancreatic insufficiency or your body's not making the right enzymes. But let's look at this study here on pancreatic enzyme therapy, and they helped us understand that there are pancreatic triggers, that the pancreas needs to be triggered to release these enzymes. So here in the duodenum, this is the first part of the small intestine. A lot of people will say duodenum, but it's more fun to say duodenum. So in this duodenum, once this food is acidified in the stomach and comes down here, that triggers hormones into action that tell a lot of these other digestive processes to kick into action. They tell the gallbladder to squirt bile down to help us emulsify our dietary fats, and they also tell the pancreas to squirt out these enzymes. Cholecystokinin is a very important hormone in this function. So these triggers need to happen for the pancreas to release those enzymes. If they're not triggered, then the pancreas is like, hey, I'm just waiting to do my job. I've been waiting around. Nobody told me to do nothing. But the problem is, a lot of these hormones are triggered by the stomach acid leaving the stomach. Now, cholecystokinin can also be triggered by fatty acids going into the duodenum here, and even amino acids. But the main trigger is the acidic food leaving the stomach and coming down to the duodenum. It's that acidity that really triggers the cholecystokinin. The problem is, a lot of people, for a wide variety of reasons, are not making enough stomach acid. A lot of people turn off their stomach acid on a daily basis on purpose. So it's very common for someone not to have enough stomach acid to really acidify their food properly and start that breakdown process, but also to trigger these hormones to tell the other aspects of digestion, hey, it's time to do your job. So this is the most common thing that your body is missing and that most doctors don't explain to people that needs to be there to allow these hormones to tell these other aspects of digestion to function correctly. Now, there are other things that can go wrong too. We need to think about an amylase shutdown, and we'll look at this study here on pancreatic biomarkers, role in diabetes, and they say that the results indicated that serum amylase activity was significantly decreased in type 2 diabetes, especially when blood glucose levels were high. And a lot of people feel like that the body is kind of restricting the amylase secretion to slow down the digestion of carbohydrates. Now the glucose won't hit the bloodstream so quickly and give such a big rise in that blood sugar. So the body's trying to help this high blood sugar issue by slowing down the digestion of the carbohydrates. But again, if you're restricting the digestion of those carbohydrates, then you're giving this bacteria, either in the small intestine or the large intestine, an opportunity to ferment those carbohydrates and create all of that discomfort. So if high blood sugar is an issue, we need to take steps to bring that down. A lot of the diabetes medications are actually designed to restrict amylase function, to kind of slow down how much sugar is going into the system at once. And this could be viewed as another example of the medical world kind of not telling people that, hey, you might want to think about the things that you're shoving down your gullet, and instead we're just going to give you this medication that restricts the body's ability to function the way that it's supposed to function. So some people just want to be told the right thing. They just want to be told, hey, step away from the pie and that will help. Oh, that will help? Yes. Step away from the pie. Just keep in mind that if you're taking these medications, I'm not telling you to stop taking them. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving anybody medical advice. I'm basically a professional stand-up comic turned nutrition author, because when I lost my voice for 8 years and 23 different doctors couldn't figure it out, I had to dig for my own answers. So now for 20 years, I've been taking that information and teaching health professionals in more than 40 countries how to help their clients fix the actual underlying causes of problems instead of just covering up the symptoms. So if you're dealing with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, we have a lot of videos on insulin resistance, and we'll put some in the description below so you can dig into correcting that a little bit. Now keep in mind that some plant foods can contain what's called natural alpha amylase inhibitors that can restrict this amylase function as well. And it could be things like, I think white kidney beans have a lot, some grains like wheat, barley, and rye, green tea. You know, most of these things, if you're eating some, are going to be okay, but if you're having every morning some type of white kidney bean smoothie with green tea, that's probably not a thing. But if that's your thing, you would want to get a different thing. So just be aware that if you're having a lot of grains, especially like cereal grain type things, that can restrict this function. There are even studies that show that if you eat a lot of cereal grains, it can lower your postprandial glucose because it's restricting your ability to digest these grains correctly. So I definitely don't suggest that, but there's studies out there showing that some of these foods really can restrict the amylase function. But if stomach acid is working correctly and allowing hormones to trigger the pancreas to release that amylase, there can be other trouble further down the line. So we want to understand these brush border enzymes that take place here in the small intestine. And these are called brush border because they're on the lining of the small intestine, a little microvilli that kind of stick up that look like the end of a paintbrush. And basically this is where this disaccharidase family of enzymes is produced. And these can be enzymes like lactase and sucrase and maltase and some others. And these really help us take those partially broken down carbohydrates and really finish off the process so that we can utilize them correctly. Now, the things that can restrict those from functioning correctly are inflammation in the digestive tract. And that can be any type of inflammation can restrict that from functioning correctly. Things like celiac disease, IBS, Crohn's, but any type of just gastroitis, any type of inflammation in the digestive tract can restrict this from functioning correctly. And the most common one to be lacking is lactase. And people will be lactose intolerant, and then they have a hard time with this dairy stuff just because they don't have the right enzyme to help them fully break down that form of carbohydrate sugar. So these enzymes are not released like amylase in the pancreas. These enzymes just kind of sit there on that brush border, and when these carbohydrates come by and hit them, then they get fully broken down and they can be assimilated right away so that the body can use those. So if there's inflammation damaging that process, then we can improve that inflammation. A lot of times the inflammation will come from like SIBO and those bacteria in the wrong place where they really shouldn't be. Sometimes it's about bile not flowing correctly so that it can come down and help neutralize the acids and trigger bicarb to come out of the pancreas to help neutralize the acids. And when those acids don't get neutralized, they continue to move through, and that can create inflammation. So it's very common for someone's bile to become too thick and sticky to flow correctly. We've talked about that in about 875 videos. I won't go into that here, but I'll have a link in the description below for our video on 5 ways to improve bile flow if you think that that could be a problem for you. But when you can reduce that inflammation by either getting rid of the overgrowth that's creating the inflammation or helping some other digestive process that's going wrong, then this study here on mechanisms for intestinal regeneration says that this part of the intestinal tract, these cells here, regenerate in like 4 or 5 days in most cases. So it's one of the faster regenerating parts of the body. So the good news is when you can correct this inflammation, there's a great chance that this can start working the right way again. So when we're looking at fixing this situation, one of the fastest and easiest things you can do is just do some type of restriction diet, and that can really reduce the symptoms that you're having. You haven't fixed anything, you haven't fixed the problem, but it can reduce the symptoms. So if someone is lactose intolerant, they just avoid dairy, and then all of a sudden they don't have those symptoms anymore. One very effective step is called a low FODMAP diet. And this is just reducing the types of fermentable fibers in a lot of foods from coming into the system and being fermented by this bacteria. So you can search for low FODMAP diets on the internet. You'll find lots, and you can look at those foods and say, oh wow, I'm eating a lot of that food. I could swap that out for something else that doesn't have as many of these fermentable fibers, and that will reduce the symptoms that I'm dealing with. A person can also supplement with enzymes and provide the body with the right type of enzymes that it's missing and help them digest that food better. I will let you know that if it's a lactose intolerant type situation, a lot of broad-based enzymes will contain some lactase, but that's usually not enough to correct that problem. Somebody usually has to use like a capsule that's really focused on lactase, and that'll give them enough to improve those symptoms. I'm not going to give you any specific brand on these ones. You'll have to do your research, but supplementing can again improve the symptoms. You're not really fixing the problem, but you're improving those symptoms and you're helping the body digest those foods better. So to fix the actual problems, we want to reduce any overgrowth that could be going on in the stomach or the small intestine where they really shouldn't be. We want to fix any hypochlorhydria issue, which is low stomach acid. And we'll look at this study here on mealtime supplementation with betaine HCl for functional hypochlorhydria. And they showed us that when someone has low stomach acid, they can supplement with what's called betaine HCl capsules, and that will basically acidify the stomach correctly and reduce those symptoms and allow the body to break down food the way that it's supposed to. So when we can acidify the stomach, then that'll come in here and trigger those hormones to tell the pancreas, hey, give me those enzymes, I need to break down these carbohydrates. So if you're going to supplement with HCl, you really want to know how to do it the right way. I'll have a link in the description below for our video on 9 HCl mistakes you want to avoid, and you want to know those things before you start testing that out. And if you have high blood sugar, that really needs to come down. Step away from the pie. Change the way that you're eating. Watch our videos on improving insulin resistance, because that high sugar could be restricting the body from putting out the amylase like it's supposed to. Now, if you're new to this channel and you don't know how to check to see if there are digestive malfunctions, we'll have a link below in the description for our totally free digestion course, and that'll walk you through looking at which aspects of digestion are not working correctly. Do I have low stomach acid? Is bile not flowing? What steps do I need to take to improve those things if there's problems there? And that totally free course will kind of walk you through that. Now, since this low stomach acid is the most common issue creating this problem with an inability to process carbohydrates and trigger that amylase to come out and such, the other problem is that the low stomach acid is usually what allowed the SIBO to come in and take over in the first place. We have a lot of videos about how low stomach acid has multiple ways to allow SIBO to take place. I'll put that link in the description below as well. But since this low stomach acid is the most common issue that needs to be corrected for most people, you can jump over right now and check out that video on 9 betaine HCl mistakes you want to avoid. I can't wait to hear about your results.